just to say that there was going to be a cost for bringing a pipe from McLaughlin Point in Esquimalt up to this site. And I think this has been largely the issue with it being technically feasible or not, but it really is a matter of cost and difficulty and practicality, in my opinion, and I think that's a shared opinion. So having brought this back, given that the CRD is now in the process of looking at sites, whether they be centralized or distributed, this site has the potential for being a candidate site as a decentralized site and not require this long, expensive pipe coming from Esquimalt up to this site. Indeed, it is close to the Marigold Pump Station and the new Craigflower Pump Station, and many possibilities exist. What was raised by the public earlier was that this piece of land is not an industrial area, but the hospital is an industrial site right next to this site, and so I would challenge that. Comments that I heard with regard to the official community plan and the rules that we have about extending the sewer system and service, that is true. But this would be a project that is not for that purpose. It is not to extend the sewer surface. It is simply to provide a site for the CRD main to allow the sewer service to function elsewhere within the region. The Saanich Peninsula plant is on a piece of former ALR land that was removed in 1975. I looked it up and I took a look at an aerial photo of that land. That land, again, was another typical non-producing site. It had sheds on it. It was where the farmer stored his tractors. And when the plant was built for Saanich, North Saanich and Central Saanich in 2000, it came to North Saanich Council where we had there was a similar discussion that we're having today, whether or not this piece of land should go in. And it comes down to debating the points. And we've heard from the members of the public on this. But we have yet to hear from the experts on the value of this land and its future potential and how it would be treated. So with that, just a small introduction, I will open up to council after hearing from the public to reconsider this item that was previously heard on June.
Could we get from staff, does this motion need to be moved and seconded, or is it because the Mayor's brought forward a resolution, it's automatically to the floor?
It would be, through the Mayor, it would be a motion to perhaps reaffirm their decision, so it would be...
I'd like to move that we consider this resolution.
Second.
Discussion, please. Councillor Haynes.
If the mover, I'd like to speak first. I'll just a few things about the site. But first of all, I'd like to raise the point of conflict of interest. It is true that I raised quite a lot of money running for my election. I raised $30,000. The way that was done is we had a website that people could donate online. We raised quite a bit that way. The other way is people sent in checks. In the matter of conflict that Catherine Whitworth has raised, and Catherine and I worked for 3 years on SCAN together, and I have a lot of regard for Catherine, the point is this. It's not whether the donation was given, because even the absence of a donation can create a bias. They didn't donate to me, I'm not voting for them. They did donate to me, therefore I'm voting for them. It's a case of, is there a link? And all my donations were given anonymously in terms of I didn't talk to people, I didn't discuss any let or favour for them. So the idea of conflict does not exist in this case. And I appreciate it being brought forward. For example, 5,000 donation against my 30,000 raise is about a sixth of my raise. There are councillors in this room with 58% of their donations from groups such as unions, but there is no conflict there, I assume and I trust, because there was no agreement on how to vote. So to single me out because I had a donation from someone who's bringing something forward to council is not, I think, well, it's fair and appropriate, and I believe I answer it by saying there was no conflict. Thank you on that matter. Regarding the proposal itself, it's very interesting because I find myself almost transported back in time to when I was the president of the Prospect Lake Community Association, and we were dealing with Heartland as a possible site for biosolids treatment, etc., and the number of kilometres of piping going up there. And based on that, I ran to get on SCAN, which is the Saanich Community Association network. They have a better community feel in part, but my first presentation at SCAN was to say sewage is the topic of our generation. And it's as important now as it was then to talk to this matter. And what I want to say about this matter is we need to get every piece of information, we need to look at every opportunity, we need to have the biggest visions possible. And what's concerning me a little is that I'm running into some of the same things that were said back then when we invited people from CRD and some people from around this chamber to come and talk to the Community Association. Some did come and talk and explain it to us. Councillor Derman was a leader on that. Others declined, saying, don't worry, the experts have looked at it, it's taken care of. That is not good enough for one of the biggest decisions of our generation, which I will be paying for and my children will be paying for. I believe I was elected to speak up and bring a new voice and some new ideas and fresh thinking to council, and that's what I'd like to do today. This particular issue, we talk about the ALR land. I read these letters, and some of these people I have great regard, look, I have great regard for all of them, but some I'm amazed have missed the point. There is no request to bring the land out of the ALR land, the registry. What is the point of land in the ALR? We heard tonight there's a lot of great agricultural producing land. It isn't in the ALR. But in the ALR there's a binary system going on. Some of it you can't grow turnips on, others is good. So where do we fall here? I believe the best and highest use of agricultural land is food production. If this proposal for Watkins Way was just a sewage treatment system, I would be more hesitant. But because it's tied to highest and best use of the agricultural land for 10 acres of agricultural food production, I think this is an opportunity the public should get a chance to look at. It's not my job, it's not the job of anyone around this table, I believe, to deny you that. Nor to deny the rest of our municipalities on the east side and their residents the same chance to look at this, a pivotal decision of our generation. Then some people have said, hey, the rivers are drying up. Hey, you know, drought, it's a real problem. Hey, our trees are going to die. That adds, to my mind, the thinking here, because the highest and best use of that water that comes out of our sewage, which currently is dumped in the ocean at a cost of around $40 million a year, is to use it in another way. One way is to try to use it for agriculture. It's nutrient rich, it would be great for greenhouses. There's issues around getting permits on that. We could put it into the ground to refeed the aquifer. We've heard the trees are drying up. So the opportunity is too big not to give it to the technical experts and the people to decide on. There is more that can be said, and as we've heard the debate today, even the people in this room shouldn't decide, the audience. It should be a decision of our entire region, and the only way we can do that is to pass the motion to forward this forward. As we already heard from a couple of speakers, there's several checks and balances that are very powerful in the way of letting any mistake not be checked. So I am confident of the expertise of the technical engineers, I am confident of the technical expertise and community goodwill of the rest of our region, and I am confident of our people in being able to say, is this socially acceptable? I have a vision that this might be a great opportunity to put some food production and agricultural use that 20 years from now, 30 years from now, we look back and say, that was one of the best things that ever happened in this region. I'm going to support this motion for the people and the technical experts to have their say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dermott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to start by clarifying for the audience exactly the process that went on here and what will or should go on in the future. First of all, Council, of course, eliminated all sorts of sites. Council was asked by the East Side Committee at the CRD to put forward a number of potentially technical feasible sites in Saanich that they either had control of or would be willing to rezone. And there were some rough categories used in terms of what would be the costs of pumping, were extra pumping required, opportunities for resource recovery, how remote the site, a number of things. And so Council used those things and we did down the number of sites, which could have been in the thousands in Saanich, to 43 that were sent forward. This particular site, considered only as a site, might have some advantages and has some disadvantages as to, for example, the ability to get sewage up there. That wasn't clear exactly how it was going to be done or what would be the result. Were you going to put new pipelines through existing Saanich neighborhoods? All sorts of things like that. They're a consideration. Just as you would be concerned about if something was quite remote, close to a residential area, potentially required the pipeline to go through that residential area, you might eliminate the site from consideration for that reason. But the biggest problem, and certainly the existence of the ALR and the existence of the urban containment boundaries are factors for consideration, even though it is correct that probably if you got permission you would not need to take this land out of the ALR. The biggest problematic issue on this site is availability. We are under a very accelerated process at the CRD, and the expectation is, before the end of the year, that you will have a very good sense of the site and technology you wish to select, and we'll be going from there. This site is in the ALR. Therefore, it is not under the direct control of either council or the landowner. For this site to be viable as a site, you would have to get permission from the ALC. They don't automatically grant approval or permission. A mention has been made of the Saanich Peninsula plant, and the fact that that plant is partially on land that is ALR land. Yes, that's true, and that went through a rather protracted process where it went back and forth to the ALR and the CRD and so forth, and eventually the CRD had to buy some other land and put it in the ALC, and it took months and months. We don't have that kind of time for something to be forward as a site. So my primary concern, although there are others, with this site is we don't even know if it's available. I did, at their request, meet with the applicants way back in the late winter, early spring. And at the time I said, well, you know, if you're going to have this site considered, you really need to check out and find out if the ALC is going to permit it, because we're in a very accelerated process and we need to know it's available. The applicants were not able to do that. So we don't know if it's available. So in all honesty, I can't put forward a site, the East Side Committee, that quite possibly is not available, and is not under the control of the landowner directly, and is not under control of council. That's just the plain and straight truth of it. What would you do if you went 3 months down the road, planned that, put a lot of time planning that as your acceptable site, and find out the ALC will not permit it? It's just not a viable position to be in. Second thing that has confused this issue is the fact that this did not come forward as a site. This came forward as a solution set, which involves both the site and technologies placed on it. None of the other sites that were put into the process involved a solution set. They're simply, these were sites that we could have, and then later in the process we will look at the solutions. I actually think there should be an avenue for this solution set to be considered in the process, and I'll describe that more completely when we come to number 3 on the agenda. And I would agree, and I do believe that the process we're looking at is flawed. But under the site selection guidelines that we were asked to consider, and which we considered other sites on, this one didn't fit the muster, plain and simple. And there is, I think, very little ability to deny that. As a solution set, maybe it could be considered, but as I mentioned, I'll talk about that in the future. I'm not going to support this going forward as a site, because I don't think it fit it then, and I don't think it fits it now, in that process mandated by the East Side Committee. Finally, I'm going to finish just by commenting on the conflict of interest issue. There may or may not be a conflict of interest here, but it is my view that I am disappointed that I find out from members of the public that there were very sizable donations made to members of council. I would expect that in that kind of situation, when the item first came forward, that the individuals involved would identify that themselves. I think that's important public information. I think you let the public know. Personally, and that's just me, maybe somebody else, I've never accepted any donations of any size from anybody who might come forward before me and that type of thing in the future. And if I had, I would recuse myself from any vote that took place involving that individual. It's plain and simple, but that's up to the individuals involved. So I can't support this. I will tell you when we come to number 3 how I think this particular proposal should be treated, as with other proposals as the project moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I want to thank everyone who came out tonight. It's hard to distill down such a complex issue over such a long period of time into your 5 minutes. I respect that most of you had to sort of zoom in on what your high points were. I appreciate Councillor Derman reminding us where we are in this long process, and that indeed the person who commented saying that perhaps Saanich wasn't holding up their share will probably be pleased now to hear that 43 sites actually went from Saanich down to consideration. And those were all sites that were deemed to be technically feasible. But to some extent, I think the decision we're making here tonight isn't really just a technical decision. What we're making here, to some extent, is a political decision. And not political in the negative sense, but political meaning having to do with public policy. Having to do with public policy and what it is that goes into our decision making. In the Saanich Official Community Plan, it promotes as a Saanich community value the protection of agricultural land for current and future generations. In general, the Official Community Plan's policies are connected to agricultural and food security and the protection of the agricultural land reserve. When we endorsed that policy in the OCP, the protection of the agricultural land reserve, following extensive public input, it almost seemed at the time like motherhood. It almost seemed like it goes without saying. However, recently I'm sensing that land in the ALR is considered by some as just like any other land, suitable for development, suitable for a sewage treatment plant, just another hurdle to be jumped. For me, this is not the case. I respect the ALR and I'm proud of our record of trying to expand it. The CRD Eastside Committee has multiple options being considered for both centralized and decentralized systems, and the case cannot be made that there are no other more suitable sites. I'm maintaining my position, which is to not support the motion on the floor.
Thank you. Councillor Worthman.
Thank you very much. Interesting night. I'd like to ask the question of staff to our clerk. Who's able to bring an item back for reconsideration like this? The mayor, the applicant, members of council, or who?
Through the mayor to Councillor Worthman. Council procedure bylaw does have 3 opportunities identified, 2 of which are required within a 30-day timeline. One is the process that we currently have, which is also under the community charter where the mayor brings back something. Another item within the 30 days is an applicant can bring back an item that has been before council or committee of the whole. And the final item is where council would actually bring forward a recommendation to consider. So this one would require that council actually consider whether they are going to reconsider the item, and then it would come forward to a subsequent meeting of council or committee of the whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I guess in having heard that, coming back to public perception, it was touched on before. In public perception, is an important part in our whole political circle, whatever level we're at. And I think in this case, it would have been better for all if the applicant or someone else had brought this forward, but we are where we are. I guess for the past 3 years or more, I have supported and suggested at council and the CRD the use of non-productive agricultural land. I believed it, but I also believe in the wisdom of council, the wisdom of the CRD, and you might have a suggestion, but you do accept the wisdom of the majority, and that's the way we have gone. Coming back to this site, I do and did support it for consideration, but as the committee set out, the CRD East Side Committee, the only criteria we were to look at, will it physically take a treatment plant? Not how big the pipes are, not if it's whatever. If there's First Nations, burial site, whatever, that would come in the next step. All we were to consider was, would it physically take a treatment plant? And I think it has been shown from the size that it will take it. Coming back to much has been said about taking it out of the ALR, I think we're reminded again tonight, and I don't know if it was mentioned at our last meeting, but tonight it was made clear that the intention was not to take it out of the ALR, it was to leave it in. It's something I've said in the past, this whole process of sewage treatment, it's been an interesting, long, drawn-out process. And I don't think any of us sitting around this table or sitting out in the audience here tonight really believe there's going to be a perfect answer, that we're all going to come together and say, yes, that's where it should go. I don't believe it will happen. There will be trade-offs, there will be things we'll have to give up in order to get something better. And this is part of the process. Coming back, it was said that there are other sites, or this site would require rezoning, it would require just a number of things. A number of sites that were in those bubbles, they would require rezoning. And probably if you asked us as council on some of those sites, we would have a tough time rezoning some of them. No ifs or buts. Coming back to some of the sites, would the owners want to sell? I think we'd have a very difficult time convincing some of those owners that they should sell to us for a sewage treatment plant. And whichever direction we do go, it's not going to be an easy direction. But I believe we do have to move ahead. And I guess my only concern is, coming back to what was asked for when it first came from the East Side Committee, we were to look at all sites that could take a treatment plant. And I believe that, I don't believe we have done that. I believe as council, we decided that there's certain ones that shouldn't be considered. And yet we've also said we want the public to have a say. But if we eliminate the sites before the public has a say, then we really got a problem as council, I think. But I do support where we are going, the direction. Is it the perfect site? I have no idea. But it will take a treatment plant, and I believe it should be considered. Thank you.
Councillor Brandolph, and then Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm glad that Councillor German explained the process we went through. I wasn't at the first meeting where council started to go through sites. That you did not, council did not select this site as technically feasible. And there were a couple of days that we worked on sites. So I want to go back to, from the East Side's perspective, we've done all the public process around sites, and as has been said, Saanich sent down some 40-some sites. Some were in bubbles and some are publicly owned lands. We had comments, I know personally I had comments about parkland and stuff like that. But now at the East Side last week, we had the presentation and the recommendations. So the following 5 recommendations represent a synthesis of input on public process findings for the East Side Select Committee. So we've gone through the whole public process on selecting sites from the mayor, you know, so many sites that were on the table. and the public got to see what was good, bad, indifferent. The biggest problem is they didn't get to see technology or costing, and for me, conveyancing. But the process is a new process. This was established as the new process. It was established as asking each municipality to put forward sites. And Saanich did that. We put forward our technically feasible sites. So recommendation 1, which was approved by the committee, was option 1A, centralized system at Rock Bay, including a mix of public and private sites, co-location of wastewater and residual treatment for a sub-regional for East Side, and option 1B is a centralized site at Rock Bay, including a mix of public-private sites, co-location for a regional site. And that option received 73% approval rate. So the centralized sites have been selected by the East Side. Then there were other recommendations. There was a recommendation to remove Ogden Point, Coast Guard, and Banfield, and the committee decided not to remove those from the mix. And then what happened was none of the decentralized options that were put forward received really strong support. There was a mixed bag of support. Saanich had some in there. So what the recommendation was that we approved was we recommend an option for a decentralized or distributed system be brought forward by the East Side Select Committee for further costing and analysis. And then number 3 was that we directed Urban Systems, who have been working on the project, to reprioritize all remaining sites. The sites were color-coded, sites that the community supported, some that were sort of supported, and some that weren't. So we've asked Urban Systems to look at all remaining sites and develop an option for a distributed system for the East Side to be presented at the July 29th meeting of the Core Area Liquid Waste. So we're going to see the work done by Urban Systems brought forward to us on July the 28th. The Core Area is going to see it at their July 29th meeting. And then when we get further into our agenda, you'll see that
Councillor, could I ask you to draw your comments back to Walkus Way and
well, I'm trying to...
Less on the process of the CRD?
Well,
Please.
Mr. Mayor, the process of the CRD, it's a CRD project. So at the end of the day, Walkus Way wasn't selected.
That was my point, Councillor, is because we're considering Walkus Way.
Walkus Way wasn't selected by this council to move forward. I agree with my colleagues around all our policies, and I said this before in the OCP about supporting farming, our ALR, our urban containment boundary. These are really significant policies that make Saanich a municipality for all to enjoy. And I think if you read Sue Henry's letter, she details all the policies within our OCP. So to make it short, Mr. Mayor, I do not support reconsideration of this.
Councillor Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'll make it shorter because my colleagues who are on the Core Liquid Waste Committee have covered very well what the process has been. I'll speak to the fact that Saanich is very strong in its historic history of protecting the ALR lands, and particularly this land which is outside the urban containment boundary. And should we consider industrial use on that site, we would be certainly sending a bad message, or I think a mixed message across the province. Also, would have us looking at having to expand our urban containment boundary that I understand would require a referendum. So I don't support it. This site was considered when the council spent 2 nights together, and we had our technically feasible sites, and I thought it was 46 sites we sent down, and I'll tell you, some of those had mixed feelings from me that I pray they don't pick that one. I hope that committee doesn't pick that one. But, we had to be good sports about this and be objective that they were technically feasible, and the engagement process has taken place. As Councillor Brownoff has spoken about how it took place and what the choices have been made. You know, I consider they talk about this as non-productive agricultural land. However, they said they could use, I think it's 12 acres and put greenhouses on. So I would suggest maybe the applicant might consider making it productive ALR land by putting greenhouses on it at this time. So I do want to uphold what we believe in Saanich, which is protecting our rural lands. As we grow in Saanich, we will grow within the urban containment boundary. I know there are people that think that eventually, someday, we will start developing out beyond the urban containment boundaries, but I don't predict that will happen anywhere, and certainly in the near future. So I want to be strong. I want to make a little bit of comment too about conflict of interest. I remember when I was first elected, and it was a tiny little twinge I had. I don't remember what it was about. It wasn't very much, and maybe it wasn't even money. And I mentioned to our CAO of the day, and he said, if the thought passes your mind that there could be a conflict of interest, you're better to err on the side of good judgment. So that's always been my policy that I've used. I wouldn't say there's a conflict of interest, a pecuniary conflict of interest, but there could be on the lobbying and having an open mind, and that's the other thing as councillors we must always remember. And I hate to see any of my colleagues get themselves in a position where they, have some negative impact. So that's my comments on that, and I will say that I still withhold my vote of the June the 22nd, that I do not support putting the sewage treatment plant on the site. Thank you.
Councillor Plant?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think with the people weighing in before, it's pretty obvious that this vote is going to end in a tie, which will mean it will not likely go forward, so I will keep my comments brief.